Okay, in another video we saw the bicep curl. Now we're going to look at the tricep extension, where we straighten the arm with the resistance coming from behind the hand, moving up in what would normally be an overhead orientation. Now, I'm going to be using a little bit lighter resistance because, again, as when we do the military press from a standing position, we're already bringing the tubes well beyond slack just to get into the starting position. So whatever weight you were using for the curl or resistance, you're probably going to want to drop back a little bit for this exercise. Now, the way this exercise is normally demonstrated is by going ahead and standing straight up with your elbows pointing as close as you can to straight overhead, and your elbows bent with the handles back behind your head. And then you just simply go ahead and go through the extension of the elbow joint and straightening the arm up. Now, the problem with this is that anytime you have a set position with your elbow joint and you're doing a single joint movement with the elbow joint, you're always going to have an area that's going to be a little bit weaker. In this case, the starting position isn't too bad. You can see that because the tubes are angling out behind my body, that to start this movement, there actually is some pretty good resistance coming from behind my hand. It's at the top of this movement that the tubes start going through just this forward and backward motion, and I'm kind of losing the emphasis on the from behind my hand as I get to the top. Now, I can lean backwards. You need to be careful in doing this, of course, and go ahead and finish off the exercise and leaning backward. Another way I can do this is by changing the orientation from my elbows pointing up above my head to pointing straight out in front of me. When I do that, you can see that I've really brought the handles, the angle of the tube coming up from behind my hand to where it's really behind my hand, and then I can go ahead and bring my elbow up as I push on up over my head. It does turn it slightly into a multiple joint exercise, but it's really putting a lot more emphasis, especially at the beginning of that motion, to have that resistance coming from behind the hand. Now let me show you how to do this with the door anchor, and I'll go ahead and place it. The door anchor is at about neck level for me, and it's going to be the same type of thing. We want to make sure that we have the same length of tube coming from each side, so the handles are equal distance from the door anchor. So we're going to be looking at the same thing as far as wanting the resistance to be coming from behind the hand as much as we can throughout the entire range of motion. So in what would be finishing the range of motion, we're going to be wanting, I'm going to just lean forward ever so slightly. My elbows are pointing what would be in that same orientation as being up toward my, pointing up above my head, and then I'm just going to go ahead and straighten down. You can see that the orientation of the tube coming from behind my hand is giving me resistance right out to finishing off this movement here. And then the way I work it through the rest of the range of motion is simply by bringing my elbow down. So by bringing my elbow down to where it's more at like about a 45-degree angle, now I'm working this middle range of motion, and then to finish off this range of motion right to the beginning, I just go ahead and I drop the angle of my elbow to be pointing down. And again, you can see I've changed the angle of where the tubes are coming from being at the top of my hand, and by moving my elbow down, you can see the resistance again is coming from behind my hand. And now I can do that beginning range of motion and really get some good resistance. Now again, as with the standing on the tubes in the more traditional manner, I can go ahead and turn this into a multi-joint exercise and almost have most of the motion simply be bringing my elbow down and bringing my elbow back up and letting my elbow come down and then bringing my elbow back up, and without really, actually opening the angle of my arm at the elbow as I would if I were doing a truly single joint exercise, by bringing my shoulder into it that angle at the elbow is constantly changing anyway. So you can see that I really don't have to do much more, and I'm not doing an overhead press because the resistance isn't coming down from underneath me, it's coming from behind me. So the emphasis is clearly on the back of my upper arm. So by just letting my elbows go ahead and straighten up, and then letting them go ahead and bend, I'm getting a real good workout through the full range of motion of that tricep muscle at the elbow joint opening up. So give those two a try. There's also some demonstrations that you might see where you're laying flat on the ground, either on the ground or laying parallel to the ground, laying on, say, a stability ball, an exercise ball, with the tubes oriented behind you. But again, if you don't change the angle of that elbow joint, there's always say if the tubes were coming from behind me, that last little part really isn't going to get the emphasis because the tube should be coming from the resistance of the tube should be coming from behind my hand, where it's coming from in back of my body if I were laying down on an exercise ball. So experiment with these, get these changes in angle with the tube, and you will find that you can really get a real good workout for your upper arms.